I'd been working late in my garage that night, tinkering with an old car I'd been fixing up. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where you could hear crickets over the hum of the highway a mile off. I liked working alone. Tools clanking, radio playing low, just me and the project. The garage was my space, a concrete box with a single overhead light that buzzed faintly. But that night, something felt off. It was past midnight, and I was tightening a bolt under the hood when I noticed the air shift, like a window had opened, though they were all closed. I wiped my hands on a rag and glanced around. The garage door was down, the side entrance locked. Just me and the shadows stretching across the floor. I brushed it off and went back to work, but then I heard it. A faint scrape, like metal dragging on concrete. I figured maybe a tool had fallen off the workbench, but when I checked, everything was in place. The unease crept in, slow and steady. I turned up the radio to drown it out, but the feeling stuck with me. I decided to grab a spare wrench from the storage cabinet in the corner, a rusty old thing I rarely opened. As I walked across the garage, the light flickered, casting the room in a stutter of dark and bright. I reached the cabinet and pulled the door open, the hinges creaking. The shelves were cluttered with old parts and cans of paint, but as I rummaged through, I heard it again. A soft shuffle, like someone stepping lightly behind me. I turned fast, expecting to see nothing but my own shadow. The garage was empty, the car sitting silently under the light. But the air felt wrong, heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I grabbed the wrench and stepped back, my pulse quickening. That's when I heard it. A faint exhale, so close it could have been right beside me. My skin prickled and I spun around, gripping the wrench like a weapon. Nothing. Just the garage, still and quiet. The light flickered again, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the room, and I stood there, frozen, listening to my own ragged breathing. Then came the sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps, echoing off the concrete walls. I stumbled toward the side door, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. The footsteps grew louder, closer, like they were circling me. I couldn't tell where they were coming from, just that they were there. Something brushed my shoulder, cold and fleeting, like a hand testing my reaction. I yelped and threw myself at the door, finally getting it open. I burst outside, the cool night air hitting me as I ran to the house without looking back. The next morning, I went back to the garage. The light was on again, the car untouched. But when I checked the cabinet, I found something. A rusted key I'd never seen before, tucked behind a can of oil. Scratched into the metal was a single word: stay. I don't work in the garage late anymore. I keep the door locked tight. But sometimes when I'm in the house at night, I hear that faint scrape of metal, and I can't shake the feeling that something's still out there, waiting for me to come back. I'd been working the closing shift at the diner that night, just like always. It was a small 24-hour place on the edge of town, the kind with chipped mugs and flickering neon signs. Most nights it was just me and the cook, but he'd left early, leaving me to lock up alone. I didn't mind. The quiet was nice after hours of clattering dishes and chatter from truckers passing through. But that night felt different. It was around 1 a.m., and I was wiping down the counters, the hum of the refrigerator buzzing softly in the background. The diner was empty, the parking lot dark except for the faint glow of the streetlights. I liked the routine. clean, lock up, head home. The overhead lights flickered sometimes, but that was just the old wiring. Nothing unusual. I'd just finished refilling the napkin holders when I felt it, a strange heaviness in the air, like someone was standing too close. I glanced around, expecting maybe a late customer had slipped in without me hearing the bell on the door. But the place was still empty. Shrugging it off, I grabbed a stack of napkins and headed to the supply closet near the back, a cramped little room next to the kitchen. The hallway leading there was narrow, the light dimmer than the rest of the diner. As I reached for the closet door, I felt that chill again, sharper this time, like a draft I couldn't place. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the single bulb overhead casting long shadows across the shelves. I was reaching for a box of napkins when I heard it. A faint shuffle, like someone dragging their feet across the tile floor. I froze, thinking maybe the cook had come back. But the sound was too soft, too deliberate. I turned toward the door, expecting to see someone in the hallway. Nothing, just the empty stretch of linoleum leading back to the dining area. The air felt thicker now, heavier. I told myself it was just the late hour messing with me, but I couldn't shake the unease. I grabbed the napkins and stepped back into the hallway, but then I heard it again, a low, raspy breath coming from the closet I'd just left. My heart thudded in my chest. I spun around, staring into the dark space. The bulb flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw something. A shadow shifting in the corner, too tall to be a stack of boxes. I backed away, my hands trembling, and hurried toward the dining area. But before I could reach the counter, the lights flickered hard and went out, plunging the diner into blackness. I stood there, breath shallow, listening to the silence stretch out. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and heavy, coming from the hallway I'd just left. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with panic, but the screen wouldn't light up. The footsteps grew louder, closer, like someone was pacing just out of sight. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was there, watching me. A cold breeze brushed my arm, like fingers grazing my skin. I gasped and stumbled toward the front door, my heart hammering. I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was stuck, the key useless in my shaking hands. The footsteps stopped, and the silence was worse than the sound. I pressed myself against the glass, desperate to get out, when I felt it again. That cold touch, this time on the back of my neck. I whipped around, but the diner was empty. No one. Nothing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to force the door open and stumbled into the parking lot, gulping the cool night air. I didn't look back as I ran to my car and sped off. When I returned the next morning for my shift, everything was normal. The lights were on, the door unlocked like it should have been. The manager asked why I'd left the napkins scattered on the counter, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Later that day, as I was sweeping near the closet, I found something, a crumpled receipt on the floor one I hadn't seen before. It was dated from years ago, with a single handwritten note scrawled across it. I see you. I quit the job a week later. I don't go near that diner anymore. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I feel that same cold touch on my neck, and I wonder if whatever was in there followed me out. I'd been working late that night, just like any other. The office was nearly empty, just a few people left finishing up their work, and I was going through some reports that had piled up on my desk. It was always quiet in the office after hours, but I didn't mind it. I liked the solitude. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights, the tap of my keyboard, the occasional murmur from the cleaning staff in the hallways. It was all oddly comforting. But that night, it was different. I had just finished printing a batch of documents when I realized I was running low on paper. I stood up from my desk, stretched, and walked toward the copy room in the back of the office. It wasn't far, maybe 30 feet down the hallway, but it felt oddly far that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like the air was thicker, heavier than usual. I brushed it off as nothing. Maybe I was just tired, a little jumpy from staring at a computer screen all day. But as I reached for the door to the copy room, I felt a strange chill, almost like someone was standing right behind me. I stopped, turned around, and looked. Nothing. Just the empty hallway stretching down toward the stairwell. I shook my head, pushed open the door, and stepped into the small copy room. The fluorescent lights flickered above me as I quickly filled the paper tray of the copier. The copy room was dim, with only one light on the far side of the room, casting long shadows across the floor. It was the kind of place you'd hardly think about, a little out of the way, hidden from most of the office, but nothing ever happened in there. It was just for making copies. But as I was waiting for the copier to finish, I heard something. A faint noise, like the shuffle of feet against the carpet. My first instinct was to assume it was the janitor, or maybe a coworker coming in to get something. But there was something off about it. The sound was so soft, almost as if it was trying to stay hidden. The shuffle got louder, closer. I glanced back toward the door, half expecting someone to walk in. But no one did. I felt that familiar tension in the air again. Something was wrong. I knew it, but I couldn't explain why. I turned around to face the copier again, but then I heard it, clearer now, a soft breath. It wasn't from the machine. It was coming from behind me. I froze, my blood running cold. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned around. There was no one there. I stepped back instinctively, bumping into the side of the copier. I could feel my heart racing, my body tense, like I was waiting for something terrible to happen. I took a slow, careful step toward the door, ready to bolt out of there. But before I could reach the handle, the lights flickered again, and then they went out entirely, plunging the room into darkness. I stood there, trying to steady my breath, and that's when I heard it again. This time it was louder, closer. I could hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from just behind me. I spun around, panic rising in my chest, but there was still no one there. The room felt suffocating, the silence too much to bear. I reached for my phone, but it was nowhere to be found. The panic started to build, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Something was in that room with me. Then, in the pitch-black darkness, I felt it. A hand. Cold, clammy fingers brushed the back of my neck. I gasped and turned around, but there was still no one there. No one in the room. No sign of anyone at all. I stumbled toward the door, heart hammering, my breathing shallow and quick. I had to get out, but the door wouldn't open. I tried to turn the handle, but it was stuck, like it had been jammed from the outside. I tugged harder, my panic growing as I heard those footsteps again, this time louder, heavier, as if someone was right behind me. I whipped around again, but the room remained empty. Finally, after what felt like forever, I managed to wrench the door open and practically threw myself into the hallway. My breath came in ragged gasps as I ran down the corridor, not daring to look back. When I reached the main office, I found the lights were on, the building quiet, but everything was normal. The janitor was finishing his rounds and gave me a tired look as I walked past him, but I could feel my skin crawling. I didn't tell anyone about what happened that night. I didn't want to sound crazy. Everyone would just think I was tired or imagining things. But something in that copy room, something I couldn't explain, left me with a deep sense of dread. The next day, I went back to the office like usual, but when I walked past the copy room, I stopped in my tracks. There, on the floor just outside the door, was a single piece of paper. A copy of a document I had never seen before. It was just a single line of text. "I'm always watching you." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up again. My hands shook as I bent down and picked it up. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who could have left this? Why was it there? I never went back into the copy room after that, and I never worked late in the office again. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. That sense of unease never left me. To this day, whenever I have to go to that building, I always check the copy room first. But I never go inside. And sometimes, when I'm walking past the door, I could swear I see someone's shadow in the corner of my eye. I haven't been able to shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was in that room with me is still watching,